Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of All Now with Alex. And I'm your host, of course, Alex. Today we have a very special guest in the building, Mr. Terry Tucker. How you doing today, sir?
I am great, Alex. Thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to talking with you.
Great, great. Same here, same here. So, can you give the people a little bit of background about yourself before we get into the questions?
Sure. Born and raised on the south side of Chicago. I am the oldest of three boys. You can't tell this from looking at me or from my voice, but I'm 6'8" tall and actually went to college on a basketball scholarship. When I graduated from college, I moved home to find a job. I'm really going to date myself, but this was long before the internet was available to help people find employment. Fortunately, I found that first job in the marketing department at the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain. That was the good news. Bad news was I lived with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mother care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. After I did my time at Wendy's, I actually went to work for the hospital that cared for my father and my grandmother. Then I made the major pivot in my life and became a police officer. And part of what I did during my law enforcement career was I was a SWAT hostage negotiator. After that, started a school security consulting business, coached girls high school basketball. But for the last 12 years now, I've been battling a rare form of cancer. And I guess just finally, my wife and I have been married for 31 years. We have one child, a daughter, who's a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy and is an officer in the new branch of the military, the Space Force.
Okay. So you've experienced almost everything it is experienced in life, and your wife has been along the ride with you the whole time.
She absolutely has. I'm very, very fortunate, very lucky.
Yeah, that's a blessing there. That's a blessing. So let's jump right into it. So can you let's see. Okay, so can you what inspired you to write your book? Because I know you got a book, the Sustainable Excellence, 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life. What inspired you to write that book?
Yeah, I never expected to write a book, never planned on writing a book, didn't even want to write a book. There's sort of an old joke that says when we talk to God, it's called prayer. When God talks to us, it's called schizophrenia. So, God has never talked to me and said, write a book. But I think what God did was put enough people in my path that started to make the same suggestion. You should write a book. You should write a book. And I think I'm smart enough that when enough people start saying something, I had to pay attention to it. But sustainable excellence was really born out of two conversations I had. One was with a former player that I had coached. As I mentioned, I was a girls' high school basketball coach when we lived in Texas. And this individual, one of my players, had moved to the area in Colorado where my wife and I live with her fiance. And the four of us had dinner one night. And I remember saying to her after dinner that I was excited that she was living close and I could watch her find and live her purpose. And Alex, she got real quiet for a while. And then she looked at me and she said, well, Coach, what do you think my purpose is? I said, I have absolutely no idea what your purpose is, but that's what your life should be about. Finding the reason you were put on the face of this earth, using your unique gifts and talents and living that reason. So that was one conversation. And then I had a young man reach out to me on social media who asked me what I thought were the most important things that he should learn, not to just be successful in his job or in business, but to be successful in life. And I didn't want to give him that, get up early, work hard, help others. I wanted to see if I could go deeper with him. So I took some notes and eventually had these 10 ideas, these 10 thoughts, these 10 principles. And so I sent them to him. And then I stepped back and I was like, well, I got a life story that fits underneath this principle. Or I knew people who, okay, your life emulates that principle. So unfortunately, during my cancer journey, I had my leg amputated in 2020. And while I was healing during those months, I sat down at the computer every day and I built stories. And they're real stories about real people underneath each of the principles. And that's how sustainable excellence came to be.
That's pretty interesting. So let me ask you. So with you going through your cancer journey and you witnessing, I believe you said it was your father and your grandmother battling cancer. So how does, how are you able to keep the mindset that you have now? Because I mean, I can only imagine how hard it must have been for you to see that growing up, and then now you're experiencing it yourself.
Yeah, I mean, when I was diagnosed with cancer back in 2012, I was told that I'd be dead in 2 years because they really had nothing to offer me other than surgery. And I absolutely went through all the, I guess, stages of grief that we would associate with something bad happen to us. First it was denial. I can't possibly have cancer. I've done everything right in my life. I've eaten right. I've exercised. I go to my doctor. And then there was sort of the anger part of, how can I possibly have cancer? I've done everything right in my life. And our daughter was in high school when I was diagnosed. And so then there was a bargaining, kind of, hey, God, let me live long enough to see her graduate from high school. And then I absolutely got down, felt sorry for myself. But then I got to a point where it was, this sucks, but I'm going to have to embrace the suck. I did not like the cards that I'd been dealt, but I knew I had to play these cards to the best of my ability. So part of, when you've been dying, and I say this sometimes, I've probably done more living in the 12 years that I've been dying of cancer than I've done in all the years before that. And I've had a pretty good life before I developed cancer. So I just think you have to have that purpose. You have to have something to do. And I learned that from my father. When my father was dying, he had end-stage breast cancer, which for a man back in the 1980s,
Right.
They didn't know how to deal with a man with breast cancer. And they told him to go home and die. And I remember he lived 3.5 years after he was diagnosed. And I think he did because he had a purpose. He loved real estate. He was in real estate. He worked up till 2 weeks before he died. And so I kind of put that in the back of my mind and said, when it's my time in the barrel, so to speak, I need to have that purpose. And so doing podcasts like this, doing writing books, it gives me that purpose. It gives me something to do other than sit around and think, boy, look how terrible this situation is.
Yeah, I agree because I've always said that laughter is the best medicine. So smiling and laughter, if you do a lot of things that you enjoy, it just helps your whole spirit out and your whole vibe. And to me, I just feel like people live longer when they laugh more and smile more. So,
I would agree. I mean, and I use humor. I mean, obviously, having no leg or having only one leg, it puts people off. It makes them uncomfortable. So I always try to use humor with that. I remember I had my foot amputated before I had my leg amputated. And I remember I was sort of, and I'm going to use the word hobbling out of the hospital. I was in this kind of boot contraption. And there was a woman at the entrance, and she was just staring hard, almost like staring right through me. And I looked around. I'm like, well, is she looking at me? It's like she was. I was the only person around. And so when I got up to her at the entrance, I just turned and I looked at her and I said, "Don't worry, it'll grow back." And I just kept walking, And she was like, she got this look on her face, like, is this guy like a salamander or something? Is something gonna, you cut it off and it grows back. So I absolutely agree with you. I try to use humor and just have fun with something that is pretty ugly and absolute adversity in my life.
Yeah, it's the same way when my dad had his leg amputated. He had his amputated up to the knee.
Okay.
From diabetes or whatever. But I was kind of worried at that time. I was like, man, he's always been this independent person where he don't need anybody for anything. He's gonna go out here and do this and do that. And I'm like, man, how is he gonna act now? I don't want him to get depressed or anything like that. But he's been handling it well. He's still been doing stuff. I mean, the same couple days after he got amputated, he was out in the yard working and freaking busted the stitches back open because he's like trying to cut the grass. And I'm like, man, if you don't sit down somewhere, but he does the same thing with the joking. I mean, and that's just one of those things. I mean, like you said, you have to just embrace it and it's just like you said, playing spades. You get dealt a hand. It might be the ugliest hand in the world, but you still got to play it to the end.
Yeah, so. Absolutely.
So, you've been a cancer warrior for the past 12 years. So how has that impacted your life outside? I mean, I know before you talked about, you just kind of you talked about the stages of grief and everything. Like how I should put it like this: how has that experience, you know, affected your family? I should say, like your daughter, your wife, and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it hasn't been easy, as you can imagine. It's certainly been difficult. I would absolutely not be here talking to you right now if it hadn't been for my wife. I mean, she is definitely a couple times during this journey saw something that was going wrong before I even experienced it, and got me into medical treatment that saved my life. And that so it has not been easy. But I'll give you kind of a funny story. So after I had these tumors in my lungs and I had my leg amputated, that's another thing. I do have tumors in my lungs. My doctor wanted to start me on chemotherapy. And I remember saying to him, "Is it going to save my life?" And he said, "Nah, probably not, but it might buy you some more time." And I said to him, "Look, if the outcome is going to be the same, if I'm going to die anyway, I would rather die feeling better than not have to go through all the side effects of chemo, but I'll go home and talk to my family." And so I go home and it's just my wife and daughter and I start telling them what the doctor wants to do. And my daughter's immediately, "All right, we need a family meeting." I'm like, "Family meeting? There's 3 of us. It's not like we got a board here or something like that, And so we sit around the kitchen table and individually talk about how we feel about me having chemotherapy. And then after we're all done, my daughter's like, "All right, let's take a vote. How many people want dad to have chemotherapy?" And my wife and daughter raised their hand. I'm like, "Wait a minute. Am I getting outvoted for something that I didn't want to do?" But Alex, when I remember when I was back in the police academy, our defensive tactics instructor used to have us bring a photograph of the people we loved the most to class. And as we were learning different techniques to defend ourselves, we were to look at that photograph because he reasoned you will fight harder for the people you love than you will fight for yourself. So I ended up taking chemotherapy, not because I wanted to, but because I love my family more than I love myself. And in hindsight, it was the bridge that got me to the clinical trial drug that I'm on now that has kept the tumors in my lungs stable for the last 3 years.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, hey, like you said, I mean, family, they can, you do so much for them and you love them so much. So, I mean, it's hard to really say no to them, especially when you don't want to have their feelings hurt earlier than it should be. You know what I mean? So,
exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So, and I definitely understand that. Like my mom passed away of ovarian cancer, ironically 12 years ago. So it was difficult for me at the time. I was 20-year-old kid, fresh out of high school, pretty much, and so life hasn't always been too kind, but like you said, we deal with the cards that we have in front of us.
Exactly.
So in your book, Perspectives on Cancer, you share stories of healing, hope, and resilience. Can you discuss the importance of resilience, particularly in the face of adversity like cancer?
Yeah, I mean, I say you have to be resilient, but there are a lot of people that aren't. There are a lot of people that just take their misfortune of having cancer and turn their entire life over to a doctor, somebody with initials after their name, and say, "Okay, you run my life now. You tell me what to do." Mm-hmm. I've always wanted my life to be based on the decisions that I made, not the decisions that somebody else made or that I didn't make. So I think it's incredibly important to be involved, to be your own advocate in healthcare. Like I said, when my doctor suggested chemotherapy, my initial reaction was, no, I don't think that's something I want to do. And, there's a writer a long time ago by the name of Ernest Hemingway, who wrote a book called Farewell to Arms. And there's a line in that book that I absolutely love. And the line goes like this: "Life breaks everyone, and afterward, many are stronger at the broken places." It's just like when you break your arm or your leg, they put it in a cast and it heals. And that area that was broken is stronger because it gets all the attention. It gets all the calcium, all the minerals, everything to heal itself. So it's stronger than it was before you broke it. If you look at life that way, that life is going to break you. You're going to have bad things happen to you in your life. Nobody gets out of this life unscathed. But if you use that break to make you stronger, to make you more resilient, to make you able to handle more adversity, then I would say that was a good thing. Now, you're not going to like it at the time, just like when your mom died of ovarian cancer. You went through a tough time. When my dad died, I went through a tough time.
Right.
But I came out stronger. And it certainly seems like you did as well from the experience, with your mom on cancer. So I would say, absolutely, you need to be resilient. So how do you become resilient? And I will recommend this to your audience because I do this every day of my life.
Okay.
Every day, do one thing that scares you, that makes you nervous, that makes you uncomfortable, that is potentially embarrassing. It doesn't have to be a big thing. But if you do those small things every day, when the big disasters in life hit us, and they hit all of us, we lose somebody who's close to us. You and I have experienced that. We get let go from our jobs unexpectedly. We find out we have a chronic or a terminal illness. You will be so much more resilient to handle those situations than people who never challenge themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like I said, I mean, we've all. I thought I got diagnosed for a quick second. A couple years back, I was pretty sick, and I went to the doctor. They did a was it an MRI or a chest? I can't remember what it was exactly. And they was like, "Oh, well, you got 2 tumors on your lung," and I was like, "What?" Like at this time, I was this was 2018, so I would have been 26, and so I'm like, tumors on my lung. Like I never smoked a day in my life. Like I'm not, what I'm saying. So I'm like,
yep.
What's going on, And then they was like, oh, it was just something that was like an extra piece of lung or something that I was born with or something. They were saying that if I would have never got a scan, I would have never knew. And I was like, at that time, life just started flashing me by. I was like, man,
sure,
but yeah. So,
and how did you handle that? How did you handle that situation?
Well, surprisingly, now that I think back on it, I actually handled it better than I would have ever thought I could have, to be honest with you. I mean, I didn't go to the extreme, but I was like, man, well, you know what I'm saying? But I was just like, you know what? I'm just gonna go to the doctor and see, what the next steps are, see what it truly is, and so on and so forth. So I didn't really get to the worst of the worst thinking wise, anyway, I should say. So
you work the problem instead of going off the rails and saying, "Oh, I'm gonna die."
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So, okay. So, how has your experience as a SWAT hostage negotiator? Because I'm glad I met you, because I've never met anyone that was actually a hostage negotiator. But of course, we always see them on TV and different shows. So, I mean, it's just interesting. I mean, I've always kind of wanted to see that. So, how did your experience as a negotiator inform your approach to mindset and self-development?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about what we did as negotiators, we were dealing with people probably having the worst day of their life. If you're talking to me and your house is surrounded by the police, it's not a good day, for you. So you really tried to put things in perspective. And I remember when I first started, they gave us a formula of how we communicate with each other. Not just how we communicate on SWAT, but how you and I communicate, how you communicate with your family and your friends and things like that. And the formula was 7-38-55. And I'll break that down real quick. So 7% of how you communicate a message to somebody are the words that you use. And think how many times you probably said, "Oh, I shouldn't have said that," or "I said the wrong thing," or "I wish I would have said that." So that's only 7% of how you communicate a message. 38% is the tone of voice that you use with those words. And then 55%, more than half of how you communicate a message with another person, is your body language and your facial expressions. So think about us as negotiators. If somebody was barricaded in a house and they had a gun, I was not in the room with them with that gun. So I didn't have the luxury of that 55%. I didn't have the luxury of saying something to them and them kind of rolling their eyes and saying, oh, what an idiot. I can't believe he said that to me. So we had to get good at figuring things out, certainly based on what people were saying, but also what they weren't saying and how they were saying it. And the overarching theme of any relationship, any person that you're close to, family member, friend, me and my wife, me and my daughter, the overarching theme is trust. If they don't trust you, if I don't trust my wife, if she doesn't trust me, we don't have a very good relationship. So we were trying to develop trust with an individual that was having the worst day of their life that we had never met before in our lives, because trust gets us to a point where we can change behavior. So how do you develop trust? You use what we used to call tactical empathy. And I think for anybody who's listened to us, you can get rid of the word tactical and just talk about empathy. So it would be like, all right, Alex, help me to understand where you're coming from. And again, the important word there is understand. If you just murdered 3 people and I was trying to negotiate you out, I wasn't going to say I agreed with you. Right. But if I can understand, or you can feel that I understand where you're coming from, that understanding, that empathy develops trust, and trust is a point where you can get to change behavior. So it was kind of a nuanced thing. It was something you kind of had to work at and figure out. There was no, here, I just follow this formula and then I'll get somebody out. You really had to deal with the patient, or with the patient, with the person that you were dealing with. And the last thing I'll say about this is the reason negotiating was so exhausting is because you had to get down in the weeds with these people. So in other words, if somebody was yelling and screaming and ranting and raving about their mother, and you said something like, oh, you seem a little upset about your mother. No, you totally missed it. No, you are pissed as all get out at your mother, because identifying that emotion and going there with them, that also helps to develop trust in the relationship.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. And I like the 7-38-55 rule. I never knew about that, but I kind of had that same mindset as well. Is like, hey, I'm big on, hey, you can tell me anything that you want to tell me, but it's how you say it. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because you can tell me, hey, Alex, I don't like what you just said. I'm like, okay, well, what did I say? But you can say, I don't like what, like, what I mean? If you put more tone and stronger voice into it, it's like, hold on, like now I may feel offended, or now I may, you know what I mean? So,
yeah. Or if you're talking to somebody and when they're texting on their phone, that body language says you don't matter. What you say isn't important to them, and things like that. So, just the little things that we do every day. I mean, your friend's talking to you and you're texting. What message are you saying to your friend? Saying, well, yeah, I don't really care what you say right now. I'm texting. So.
Right. So let's see. So as someone who has been published in various magazines and books, what advice would you give any aspiring writers or thought leaders looking to share that message?
I'd say your message matters. We all have a story. We all have a reason that we're here. And I think a lot of times we don't feel that we matter, like that we're invisible, nobody sees us, and things like that. And I'll give you a story that sort of illustrates that. As I mentioned, I still have tumors in my lungs, and I'm treated at the hospital every 3 weeks for those tumors. And this was several months ago. I had one of my nurses, a young woman, about 25 years old, already a nurse, but learning how to do things on the unit. And she was taking care of me a little while later, and she came in and she said, Terry, I've got a story I want to tell you, but I don't know how to tell it to you. And Alex, I didn't know how to respond to that. It was kind of like, well, I hope you decide you want to tell me the story. So she's in and out doing her nursing duties, and then finally comes in, sits down, and says, all right, here's the story. She said, when I first met you, I was going to get out of nursing. I'd had a very good friend of mine die. I was in a really dark place. I talked to my family. I was going to quit nursing, and I was going to go to work for Amazon. And she said, and then I met you. And I see the reactions you have with your medicine and how you shake and throw up and all that. And then I went back in your file and read everything you'd been through. And she said, when I finished reading your file, I knew I was where I was supposed to be. Now, if she would have never told me that story, I would have had no idea that my life had had an impact on her. So never think that your life doesn't matter. Never think that your experiences don't matter. So absolutely, they do matter. The second thing I would say is put it out there. Get it out there to people. Write the article and give it to other people and ask them to be critical. Is this good? Is this bad? What's wrong with it? Tell me how I can improve it. And don't take it personally. Don't take it personally if somebody says, I don't know what you're saying here, or you need to clean this up, or whatever it ends up being. When I wrote Sustainable Excellence, I had 2 rules. I said, every day I will write at least 1 page, a minimum of 1 page every day. And number 2, I will not edit anything until I feel I have a first draft. And Alex, there were days I sat down and I wrote absolute garbage. I'm like, this is terrible. It'll never get into the book. And then the next day I might write something better. And then I'd write garbage again. And then I'd write something better. So as long as you can be consistent and put stuff on paper, the more you write, the more you ask for critiques and feedback, the better you will get at it. And understand that it may take years before you get there. I love the quote from Usain Bolt, the sprinter, the fastest man in the world, who said, I spent 8 years learning how to run 9 seconds. And people give up on their thoughts and their dreams after 2 months. So I love that quote. Kind of puts things in perspective.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's when you think about it, when you first hear it, that's interesting. I mean, I spent 8 years to run 9 seconds. And I mean, it makes you think like, hey, yeah, he's right. I mean, he spent that long just to run 9 seconds, and I'm just giving up after 3 weeks of trying to achieve a goal. You know what I mean? So yeah, I definitely understand that. So with everything you explained, it sounds like your life has been kind of busy per se. So how do you balance like your various roles as a speaker, author, podcast guest, and cancer warrior while maintaining a sense of purpose and fulfillment?
Yeah, I think the first part that you asked me really gives me that purpose. So the second part of that question, so being able to be on podcasts with people like you, being able to write, being able to write books or articles or whatever, being able to speak in front of groups with the understanding that, and I don't ever want to come across like I've got it all figured out. Like I know everything. I mean, you're looking at me right now. There's no S on my chest. I do not have a cape and fly around with magical powers. I am just a person who has been through some challenges, some adversity in their life, and has learned from those challenges and adversity. And I like to offer them to people, not as this is what you need to do to be successful. But I always tell people, if there are bits and pieces of what I talk about that you think work in your life, then by all means take them. Take them and incorporate them in your life. If there are things that don't resonate with you, that you don't think that works for you, then that's okay. Find what does work for you in your life. But I think that's the important thing is continuing to develop, continuing to learn, to continuing to be curious. There's an entrepreneur by the name of Ed Milet who talks about the 4 types of people in the world. And he talks about the first group are the unmotivated. And he said, that's the vast majority of people that you will run across in your life. The second group he talks about are the motivated. He said, it's kind of a carrot and stick approach to life. If I do this, I will get that. It's kind of a life based on motivation. It's rather low level, but it works for a whole lot of people. And then the third group he talks about are the inspirational people. The word inspiration coming from 2 words, in spirit. So if you're an inspirational person, you move people with your energy. And then the last group he talks about are the aspirational people, where people aspire to be like you. And sometimes when I'm giving a talk, depending on the audience, I'll tell that story and then it'll be like, all right, show of hands. How many people are unmotivated? And nobody raises their hand. Nobody ever says, I'm not motivated. But if you believe Milet, most of the people you come in contact with are unmotivated. So it's interesting, the perception of what we think we are versus what other people see us as. It's always kind of fun. And that's why I always say, ask people, talk to people. what do you think I'm good at? What do you think I'm bad at? What do you think I can improve on? And like I said, don't take it personally. Find those people who are willing to care about you in your life and climb the mountain with them. Let those people invest in you and you invest in them and see where that takes you.
Yeah, and I'm the same way. All my friends, well, I don't even call them my friends. I call them my brothers because they're just as close to me as family. And but it's the same way with them. Like I tell them, hey, I ask them from time to time things about me, like, hey, what can I do to improve at this, or what can I do to improve at that, or or me just as a human being in general, because without that healthy dialogue, there's no improvement. So I'm big on that, and then also checking on each other's mental health because us as men, people aren't checking on our mental health like that. So you got to have those people that's close with you. Like I can call my brother and say, hey, how's your mental health today? How's your mind doing? He'll say, oh, well, this, and we'll talk about it, to at least have the conversation started. Because if you never start the conversation, there's no telling what thoughts will run through your mind. You know what I mean? So.
I do. And that was something as a negotiator, and I get this sometimes with people. I mean, if we felt somebody was going to hurt themselves or kill themselves, we would flat out ask them. I mean, we would come right across. It's like, hey, Bob, are you thinking about killing yourself? And if they're not, they're going to come back with something like, no, you dummy, I'm not going to kill myself. But if they are, you've just opened that door. And a lot of times people will say to me, well, I thought something was wrong, but I didn't want to say anything because I was afraid I was going to put the idea into their mind. You're not. If you see somebody, anybody who's listening to us, if you see somebody or think somebody, they're talking about death, they're giving things away, they've got sort of that gallows humor, and you think they may be willing, to harm themselves or kill themselves, just ask them, hey, are you okay? Are you thinking about hurting yourself? Are you thinking about killing yourself? Because I guarantee you, if they're not, they're going to fire back on you like, no, I'm not doing that. But if they are, you give them you open the door, you give them that opportunity to be like, oh, somebody sees it. Somebody cares. Somebody is listening to me. And then people are like, well, I don't know how to deal with that. You don't have to deal with it. Just listen. Just listen. Let them get it off their chest. And if they do, it's amazing how much better they feel. And if it gets to the point where you feel that they really are going to do it, call 911 and let professionals handle it.
Right. Yeah, I've seen things and read things before to where it's like if you ask the question, then more than likely they're not going to do it now because it's been put into, I guess you say, put into the universe, or you've asked them about it. So now it's like now they start thinking about it more like, okay, I probably shouldn't do that, or it just kind of gets their mind going in a different way instead of just thinking that people don't care, like you said. So
yeah, they're not isolated. They don't feel like nobody cares. Somebody cares because somebody asked about it. So you're absolutely right.
Correct. So what do you feel has been the most rewarding aspect of your journey as a motivational speaker and self-development expert?
It's really been the people, the connections that I've had with other human beings. There's a great quote, I think, from Mother Teresa, who said, God never asked us to be successful. He asked us to be faithful. And one of the nurses who cares for me used to be a hospice nurse. And for those of your audience who don't know about hospice, it's people who take care of others at the end of their life. It's end of life care. And she recommended a book to me. And the book was called Imagine Heaven. And it's a book about people who have had near-death experiences. In other words, they died and were dead for a while, and then medical science got them back. And the interesting thing about a lot of interesting things in the book, but one of the interesting things is no matter who the person saw during their near-death experience, whether it was, Jesus or an angel or a saint or a friend or a relative, the one question that almost everybody got asked was, how do you treat my people? In other words, if you think about Jesus being asked, what's the most important commandment? Have no other gods but me, love your God above everything else. And the second is just like it, love your neighbor as yourself. Nobody got asked, did you cheat on your spouse, or did you embezzle from your company, or did you, steal from your neighbor? Not that you should do those things. You absolutely should not. But, at the same time, the one question was, how do you treat my people? How do we treat each other? You know, how do we connect with each other? And that's really been what I've gotten out of being a speaker and a coach and things like that, is those connections, that those relationships that I've developed with other people. I mean, at the end of your life, the universe really doesn't care how much money you made, how important you were, how much influence you had. What it really cares about is how did you connect? How did you have relationships with other people?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. So, can you share any success stories or transformations that you witnessed in individuals who've applied your principles for sustainable excellence?
That's a great question. I'm trying to, I had a young man who reached out to me, and I got an email from this person. I had no idea who he was, and he said, I heard you on a podcast. And he said, you mentioned your book, Sustainable Excellence, and I went out and I read it. And he said, it's changed my life. And the interesting thing about it is I said to him, podcast. Okay, great. I said, what podcast did you listen to? And Alex, he gave me the name of a podcast. And I'm like, I don't remember that podcast. It was a podcast I had done 2.5 years ago with a host. He found that podcast, listened to it, and then said, okay, I'm going to get your book and I'm going to apply those principles in my life. And so I the things you're doing now, the things I'm doing now, those things are evergreen. Those things that are going to be around 5 years from now, 10 years from now, even if you stop doing your podcast, it's still going to be out there where people can get their hands on it. So, I was kind of excited that this young man had actually reached out and said, your podcast impacted me enough to go get your book and apply the principles that you have in that book in my life. And that's made my life better. And for me, I mean, I could have died right there and be like, you know what? No, I made a positive difference in somebody's life and they reached out to me and helped. So I guess that's just one that comes to the top of mind when you ask that question.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely good. I mean, anytime you can impact people's life for the better, it definitely gives you a warm feeling inside for sure.
It does. But a lot of times, as you know, people don't tell you. I mean, you don't know who impacted, whose life you've impacted based on your book or based on your podcast or what you said on a podcast or something like that. You just don't know. And that's why you put it out there and, whoever needs to hear it. I've always said I've never been on a podcast that I shouldn't have been on because somebody out there needed to hear the message that the host and I were talking about. So I always think that makes me feel good when I do these.
Definitely. I would agree. So a couple more. Let's see. What are some common mindset traps or limiting beliefs that individuals often struggle with, and how can they overcome them?
Yeah, I mean, one of the chapters I put in Sustainable Excellence is titled this, and it's titled this, and I put it in there because I know I've done it several times in my life. And the chapter is entitled "Most People Think with Their Fears and Their Insecurities instead of using their minds." And I know I've done that. I know I've like, maybe I should start this business, or maybe I should get involved in this project. And it's like, oh, wait a minute. Maybe I'm not smart enough. Maybe I don't have enough information. What will people say about me if I fail? That's thinking with our fears and our insecurities. That's not thinking with our minds. And I love the story. Jesse Itzler is a man who, I don't know if he still is, but at one time, he was part owner of the Atlanta Hawks in the National Basketball Association. And he's married to a woman by the name of Sarah Blakely. And Sarah Blakely started a company called Spanx. It's a woman's undergarment company. But he tells the story, because he was married to her when this happened. He said she started that company with one prototype, one piece of clothing, one garment, and $5,000. And the point of his story is, he said she jumped in and did it. He said if she would have waited until she had the financing and the distribution and the human resources and the marketing and all these things lined up, he said, I guarantee you somebody else would have come up with that idea and run with it. So I guess what I'm suggesting to people is wherever you are, just start. Just jump in. Jump in with both feet. Don't stick your toe in the water. Jump in with both feet and figure it out as you go along. If people haven't figured this out yet, it's not the destination. It's not getting to the top of the mountain that's important. What's important and where life is lived is in that journey to the end of that destination, that journey to the top of that mountain. That's what life is all about. It's not getting there. It's the journey that you experience during that trek or that climb to get to where you want to be.
Right. Yes, I would definitely agree with that as well. How do you hope to inspire and empower others to lead their own uncommon and extraordinary lives, as your book title suggests?
I just figure I've got to be able to live it. I go on all these podcasts, I talk a lot, but if I can't walk the walk, then all the talking I do doesn't matter. If somebody can't look at my life and say, okay, like I said, how do you callous yourself? How do you get ready for those difficult times in your life? You do uncomfortable things every day. Well, I don't just tell people to do that. And I would never do that if I didn't do it myself. If I didn't feel like I'm going to do at least one thing every day that is uncomfortable for me as well. So be a walking billboard for what you want out of life. And so that people will say, okay, hey, that Alex, he's really sharp. He's really put together. He's overcome adversity. And you don't have to say anything. It's kind of, I'm trying to remember the quote. There was a great quote. It was like, if you're good, if you know you're good, you tell other people. If you're great, other people tell others about you. It's something like that. So you don't need to tell everybody how good you are. Your actions, the way you conduct yourself, the way you act in certain situations, that'll say everything. You don't need to say a word. Let your actions speak for themselves.
Yeah, that's kind of my way of thinking too. I tell people all the time, I don't have to tell people like, hey, I'm a good person or anything like that. They're gonna see it from just seeing me do what I do and how I treat other people, and then other people are gonna tell them like, hey, yeah, he's a good dude, So I never just tell anybody, hey, I never try to explain who I am to anybody. I just like, hey, if I meet you, we have conversations, you're gonna find out who I am through our conversation. I don't have to, try to be anybody else or anything like that. I'm just gonna be myself and be my genuine self all the time. So, if you like it, of course, you like it. If you don't, then, maybe it's a reason you don't like it. But I've never met anybody that really just doesn't generally like me unless it was for a certain reason.
Sure.
But yeah, I'm the same way. I just let the actions and the personality and everything speak for itself and just go from there pretty much.
Yeah.
Alrighty. So, let's see. So, okay. So I know earlier you talked about what you would suggest some people to do is every day do one thing that they find uncomfortable to kind of help them get ready for if anything big comes on. Is there any other practical tips or habits that people should, maybe adopt to get more of a positive and growth-minded mindset in their daily life?
Yeah, we're talking. It's kind of graduation season now. A lot of people are graduating from high school and college and things like that, and they're kind of getting out into the world. They're getting started in the world. And two things I'll say to them. Number one, you don't have to have it all figured out, and that's okay. A lot of people don't. And secondly, it's more important who you work with and who you work for than it is the work that you do. Find people that are willing to invest in you. Find people who care about you. Find people that want you to be successful and climb the mountain with those people. Hitch your wagon to those people and climb with those individuals. Make them better and you make yourself better. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is, Alex, I've seen so many people in their life that feel that they're born empty. And that when they get out of school and they get into life, whatever that looks like for them, that then their job is to fill their empty self up. I've got to get the best education and make the most money and drive the nicest car and have all the latest gadgets and gizmos. And that somehow having all this stuff will make them happy and fulfilled. And what I found is It's just the opposite. We're not born empty. We're born full. We're born with everything we need to be successful, however you define that word in your life, already inside of us. We just need to find those things and pull them out and use them to our advantage. So our job in life should not be to fill ourselves up. Our job in life should be to empty ourselves out with our unique gifts and talents, certainly for the betterment of ourselves, but also for the betterment of our families, of our friends, of our communities, and of our countries. And when you make that shift in your life, because I can promise you, and I've seen so many people do this, well, if I get the next thing, if I make more money, then I'll be happy and I'll be fulfilled. And they never are, because there's always more money to be made. There's always more things to get. And you're never gonna get there. You're never gonna have enough stuff. So don't look at what you can get. Look at what you can give. And when you do that, it's amazing how much more enriching your life will be.
Yep, I would agree. Is there anything else that you would like to share with the audience about your journey, your message, or your vision for inspiring sustainable excellence and self-development before we wrap it up?
I'll tell you one more story, if you don't mind.
Okay, yeah. I'm all for stories now.
Stories are great, aren't they? I heard somebody tell me once, said, never make a point without telling a story, and never tell a story without making a point. So absolutely, I love stories. So when I was young, I was a big fan of Westerns. My mom and dad, and I'm really going to date myself now. My mom and dad used to let me stay up late and watch programs like Gunsmoke and Bonanza, and my favorite was Wild Wild West. 1993, the movie Tombstone came out. You may have seen it. It was a huge blockbuster. It starred Val Kilmer as a man by the name of John Doc Holliday and Kurt Russell as a man by the name of Wyatt Earp. Now, Doc Holliday and Wyatt Earp were two living, breathing human beings who walked on the face of the earth. They're not made-up characters for the movie. Now, Doc was called Doc because he was a dentist by trade, but pretty much Doc Holliday was a gunslinger and a card shark. And Wyatt Earp, almost his entire adult life, had been some form of a lawman. And somehow these two men from entirely opposite backgrounds come together and form this very close friendship. And at the end of the movie, Doc Holliday is dying at a hospital in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, which is about 3 hours from where I live. The real Doc Holliday died at that hospital, and he's buried in the Glenwood Springs Cemetery. And Wyatt, at this point in his life, is destitute. He has no money, he has no job, he has no prospects for a job. So every day he comes to play cards with Doc, and the two men pass the time that way. And then this almost last scene in the movie, they're talking about what they want out of life. And Doc says, when I was younger, I was in love with my cousin, but she joined a convent over the affair. But she's all that I ever wanted. And then he looks at Wyatt and he says, what about you, Wyatt? What do you want? And Wyatt kind of nonchalantly says, I just want to lead a normal life. And Doc looks at him and says, there's no normal. There's just life. And get on with living yours. Alex, you and I probably know people. There's probably people out there listening to us that are like, well, when this happens, I'll have a normal life. Or when this occurs, I'll have a successful life. Or when that happens, I'll have a significant life. What I'd like to leave your audience with is this. Don't wait. Don't wait for life to come to you. Get out there, find the reason you were put on the face of this earth, and there is a reason. Use your unique gifts and talents and live that reason. Because if you do, at the end of your life, I'm going to promise you two things. Number one, you're going to be a whole lot happier. And number two, you're going to have a whole lot more peace in your heart.
I like it. I definitely agree. And that's a nice way to wrap it up. So I definitely thank you for your time today. It was definitely a very inspiring episode, if I do say so myself. Everyone that's out there watching, you guys, if you guys want to keep up with Mr. Tucker and check out his books and so on and so forth, all this information will be in the description or the show notes if you're listening to the audio version. So you guys go check him out. Go, conversate with him. If his book changes your life, make sure you let them know. You know, it makes them feel better, and of course, it makes you feel better as well. So, but once again, I thank you for your time. Everybody that's watching, you guys have just watched another episode of All in All with Alex. So we'll see you guys on the next episode.